What's up, Cougar Nation, and welcome again aboard the Hype Train podcast. My name is Joe Wheat. That's at Joe Wheat 27 on Twitter. As always, my boys Hunter Miller and Trevor Levitt. Brethren, we are back by popular demand, and by popular demand, I mean the demand of my brother-in-law, who called us out for only having emergency podcasts when there's bad news, because there has been a ton of good BYU news over the last couple of weeks, and we have not discussed any of it. So, Hunter, give us a piece of good news.
Piece of good news is I did not play terribly at golf this morning.
Excellent.
Bad, but not terrible. So that's like we're progressing. Another piece of good news is I put a golf net in my garage, which then inspired Joe to put a golf net in his garage. Piece of good news too is I saw Joe twice this week. Once on purpose. Well, technically in the last 7 days, once on purpose and once by accident. A pleasant running into each other at Shields on Saturday.
Dude, Shields is the place to make connections, 100%.
Yeah, it was there I was looking at melon hats. I always look at hats. Rachel's worst fear is like driving east on 106 South, because it either means we're going to like PGA Superstore or you into golf or Shields. So I coerced her into I faked out that we were going to Costco with no golf store trip. There's a golf store trip. Spoiler alert. Went to Costco, went to the little food court, got myself a little chicken bake. And then I was like, hey, while we're here, Shields is like half a block away. Might as well stop in and see what's new. Turns out nothing new. But as I was there, turned the corner and by gosh, Joe and his wife.
So something new was there.
Yeah,
your friend was there.
Someone new was there, but not something new.
Trevor, give us some good news. Sorry, I totally just cut Hunter off.
Gotcha. All right, I had no other good news. That's the end of
it. Good news on my end. I am starting a new job on Monday.
What do we got?
So I will be joining Keegs on Twitter. You guys know him at Enterprise. I will be starting in the manager training program.
Nice.
Sick.
It's a 9-month training program. And then from there, they could find a place to put you. And you start as an assistant manager and you kind of work your way up from there. And there was a lot of interviews. It was like 3 or 4 interviews, but every person I met, I loved. Keegan was very helpful throughout the entire process. So Keegs, if you're listening to this, appreciate you. But yeah, very excited to get that going.
Keegs better be listening to this.
Enterprise of Woods Cross. Get ready to learn Hype Train podcast sponsorship, buddy.
Yeah, so it's right in Bountiful, and it's less than a mile from my house actually.
Dude,
so
let's go.
There you go.
I've decided that my schedule, I'm gonna try and go to the gym before work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then I'm gonna try and walk to work Tuesday, Thursday. So check in on how that ends up turning out, but that's the plan.
This sounds like Joe's plan of taking front runner to work every day.
Dude,
hey, he loves it though.
I am so tired of commuting. But I have met a lot of really awesome and interesting people. Some hilarious,
interesting for sure. Yeah.
Some not, yeah. I've
front
had some good and some interesting experiences on the front runner. I guess what better news has there been? But BYU has a new basketball coach.
The last time we recorded, it was BYU has no basketball coach, and my life is ending. Here we are 2-3 weeks later.
Hold on.
Go on.
Sorry.
Was that too dramatic or not
no,
dramatic?
You know how you said a piece of good news and I immediately went to work. So
okay.
Yeah.
I had a baby.
That's also did happen.
I had the birth of my newborn and first son, TJ.
And Zach Wilson got traded.
Didn't
really
this happen last time?
Trevor.
Really? So So we've had some great news for two of Trevor's sons over the last couple weeks. One is his actual son, and the other one is his boy Zach Wilson.
Yeah, absolutely. He's
being reborn in his NFL pursuits.
Bronco country, let's ride, right? But TJ, Trevor Jason, he was 9 pounds, so big baby, and
that's a big boy.
Knock
TJ
on,
Levitt.
Yes, knock on wood, but he's been perfect. He sleeps, and like that's really about it. He lets mom and dad sleep through the night, and really doesn't complain much. So,
but enough about Zach Wilson. How's that baby?
Yeah, he's so fun. He's got like I'm not kidding, like lightning blonde hair. Whenever we give him a bath, it like disappears. He turns bald. So, but I
also have that happen.
Yeah, he's a cutie. He's a cutie. So we're glad to have him. I'm glad to bring it full circle. I'm glad to have a new job to provide for him. So there you go.
How many is that?
Kick saving abuse.
Yep, 3.
There's an entire starting 5 of basketball players in the Levitt household.
It's true. We finally we needed a point guard, and we finally got him. So
at this rate, you might have to play center for BYU basketball at 9 pounds.
Yeah.
Oh man! All right, let's give a quick recap of all the good news since we last talked. Not only did BYU hire a new head basketball coach, the head basketball coach surpassed my wildest expectations. So I learned that, one, I don't dream big enough when it comes to BYU sports, apparently. Yep. Number 2 is, I guess we lost Colin Chandler to the transfer portal that next morning. Was that?
Entering the portal on your mission is crazy work.
Not clearly not a
heresy.
Not clearly not a great fit.
Yeah.
Clearly not a great fit. Just kidding. We love you, Colin. Best of luck at Kentucky, or not.
Was he just like sending like emojis on where his parents just sending him messages on Messenger, and he's either thumbs upping or thumbs downing? That's what I want to know. Do you want to enter the transfer portal? Bing.
It wasn't even like portal. It was just like released from letter of intent, and then immediately signed a new letter of intent from it to Kentucky. You did have obviously Richie and Dallin Hall announced that they were staying at BYU, and then you had Ali Khalifa go to Louisville, so didn't even follow Mark Pope to Kentucky. I do, and like I'm sure we'll get into it later. A lot of people out there on the old Bird app, well, formerly Bird app, now X app. Is it interesting? Like, how much do you buy into the fact that the only player that followed Mark Pope from BYU to Kentucky is a player that actually hasn't played for Mark Pope yet?
I'm workshopping that take.
Okay.
I haven't totally decided yet. We'll see what happens with Jackson Robinson, but
I mean, he's NBA and that, except for.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of bouncing around all over here, but if I were Jackson Robinson, I would 1000% enter the NBA, because this year's draft class, I feel like he's got a chance of being a first round pick. But I think you should read into that a little bit. I don't know Mark Pope. The only interactions I've ever had with Mark Pope were really positive. He was always really nice to me when I met him a couple times. However, I do find it interesting that guys who entered the portal under the tag "do not contact," so inferring that, hey, I'll reach out to you, or I already have a place I want to go. Like Ali Khalifa was one of those. We all assumed he was Kentucky bound, and then all of a sudden it was Louisville. Like, I feel like there's something going on behind the scenes where, like with Dallin Hall, who apparently told Pope thanks, but no thanks, which was really surprising. Richie Saunders was on Kentucky's campus, and then all of a sudden did an about face and He was getting crystal ball to Kentucky. I think he had like silently committed for a second.
He was crystal ball to Kentucky, and there was that photo of Mark Pope hugging him off the escalator.
Yeah, and now all of us and literally 24 hours later, he's back at he's back at BYU. So like,
and that all even happened after BYU had hired a new coach too.
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing. So like throwing it back to like our emergency podcast, my take was that Chris Burgess should be the hire because he had the best chance of keeping guys like Dallin, Richie, Foose all in place. Turns out BYU didn't even need to hire Chris Burgess yet for Kevin Young to just do absolute work with selling his vision of the BYU basketball program in 2024, 2025 to his current roster. And it's like, in one sense, it's like, yay, like we got Dallin and Richie back. That's awesome. But in another sense, BYU, like in the way I prefer to see it, BYU got a 4-star point guard out of the transfer portal over offers from Kentucky, Duke, Clemson, and Oklahoma, and then got a shooting guard out of the portal over offers from Creighton, Kentucky, and I can't remember where else Richie was being recruited. But really, like, I think we should make this an annual tradition where BYU's best players enter the transfer portal. So when they come back, we can tout how highly recruited our roster is.
Did BYU, are they going to have the highest transfer portal recruit ranking in the country now?
Let's see.
Just because half their team.
People are asking.
I think Dallin and Richie factor into the 24/7 rankings, but if they did, BYU would be pretty far up there.
Like if Jackson comes back too, then
I think so. Like
while he's looking that up,
their high school recruiting class right now with the signing of Brody Kozlowski. Yeah, they have the 30th ranked recruiting class in the country right now for basketball with the signing of Brody Kozlowski. Oh, hi. Sorry. BYU has the 30th ranked high school recruiting class with the signing of Brody Kozlowski.
That's like, I mean, getting him is like the 10th best thing on the list that happened for BYU basketball.
I mean, it's
almost like an afterthought. Like no offense to him at all, but it was, to be honest, it's like, oh, cool, great, yeah.
It really, and that 100%, he doesn't come to. I mean, obviously, he committed to USC originally.
Yeah,
that one does not happen if Pope is still at BYU.
For sure.
Yeah,
that's one for sure.
So like list the 5 biggest things, right, in the last like 2 weeks that have happened to be like just BYU athletics as a whole, right? Like number 1 is obviously hiring Kevin Young as
so
head coach.
I'll go from 5 to 1.
Okay, go up to 1. Give us a little bit of anticipation.
So number 5, Brody Kozlowski comes to BYU.
Okay.
4-star commit. I guess it doesn't say. Brody Kozlowski is BYU's fourth highest rated recruit ever, according to 24/7. So that's number 5. Number 4, Richie Saunders comes back to BYU.
Okay.
Number 2, Dallin Hall comes back to BYU.
Okay.
Number 3. Number 2, Kevin Young is hired as BYU's basketball coach.
Yep.
And number 1, BYU learned how to putt. BYU is out here paying a head coach in their athletic department $30 million over 7 years. They gave Chris Burgess, who is an assistant at the University of Utah, his alma mater. They gave him a $100,000 pay raise to come to BYU. We got a assistant coach from Stanford. We're in the works of apparently hiring another NBA assistant to come and be an assistant coach at BYU. BYU, like the best news for BYU right now is that it is clear that the athletic department is here to play big boy sports. They are here to spend money. They are here to let boosters be bagmen. I'm here for it. BYU has waited 40 years to finally be a part of big time college athletics. And boy, oh boy, have they not disappointed so far.
Yeah, I have an honorable mention for your list that goes right along with number 1. And it's the fact that Ryan Smith has apparently given BYU a blank check. Like this is,
love it. I love it.
Just every
Not
time,
even my money.
Yeah, just every time something comes up, Ryan Smith's name is in there. He's offering Dallin Hall a bunch of money. He's asking, can we help pay for Richie to come back? What do we need to do to get Kevin Young here? We were maybe considering hiring him instead of Will Hardy for the Jazz, but that didn't work out. So instead, let's get him to BYU. I mean, it really is like you have somebody in Ryan Smith who clearly cares about the university and is frankly doing with his money what I would do if I was in his situation. And most importantly, as you already said, Joe, the university has finally said, okay, like we're going to let the big dog eat. And that is really all that it took, right? I mean, this is you hiring Kevin Young, who on top of that, I know that we've talked about before with examples of like Kalani kneeling against inferior opponents when he could score and the style points would be better or whatever. We wish he was a little bit more aggressive. How about Kevin Young coming in like first day and being like, hey, by the way, I could get Chris Paul and Devin Booker and guys like Joel Embiid here at the NX working with you guys. I mean, this
Joel
isn't
Embiid as far away from BYU basketball as possible.
Sure, but the point is he has the attitude of like, I have these resources. I'm a big deal. I have NBA experience. I want to turn BYU into an NBA pipeline, and I'm not afraid to throw that around. And that to me is just something that BYU has kind of needed for a long time, is just somebody that is not cocky, but is confident and knows it enough to do something about it. And I think that's probably 1A or 2A, I guess, in Joe's list of hiring Kevin Young, is that the Kevin Young hire is awesome, and Kevin Young knows that he's awesome. And I just can't wait to see the results of that.
Also, sneaky good news. An NHL team coming to Salt Lake, Ryan Smith buying the Coyotes. Also sneaky good news for BYU, because that's just more Utah fans' money that is now being funneled from Ryan Smith to the BYU athletic department. So I'd like to thank everyone who purchased Arizona Coyote season tickets for BYU's new head coach.
Utah Outlaws season tickets. So piggybacking off that thought, is it BYU athletics that is now playing ball, so to say, with money and paying coaches and bringing in players and assets, or is it simply BYU basketball? Because I've yet to see anything from the football team, which is really the cash cow, that would lead me to believe they are playing under the same rules with the same money and the same donors and the same leniency when it comes to paying coaches exorbitant amount of money and paying to retain players and all those things that go into building a successful program. I haven't seen anything like that from BYU football. In fact, I've seen the opposite from BYU football over the offseason. So is it a BYU basketball thing and it's just because Ryan is a basketball guy and he's the one that's actually funding this, or is it actually BYU athletics?
I think in some ways it is BYU basketball, because again, Danny Ainge and Ryan Smith are the ones pulling the strings. Like if BYU does not have Danny Ainge and Ryan Smith in their corner, Kevin Young is not BYU's head basketball coach. So I get that. The part I'll push back on football is that, similar to me not dreaming big enough for wanting Kevin Young to be the BYU head basketball coach, the hiring of Jay Hill, I think, was the first signal that BYU is here to play big boy football, trying to play big boy football as well, because they paid a defensive coordinator what I'm pretty sure Bronco Mendenhall was making, back in when he left the job for Virginia. Like paying a defensive coordinator $1.2 million or whatever Jay Hill is making. To me, that's the first signal. We haven't seen a new Kalani extension come up yet. There just doesn't seem to be as much of a need to flex from the football department, which I wish they would.
There's a need to flex at
because
certain positions.
Because that's the thing with the basketball program right now. Like I think Mark Pope big timing BYU
We're losing Joe left and
lit a
right.
massive fire under the athletic department. Oh my gosh. Are you losing me again?
We got you.
Am I back?
Whenever you come back
Okay.
at speed recaps what you said.
Sorry. So I think Mark Pope leaving for Kentucky, I think was a wake-up call to the athletic department that we need to be splashy. I don't think BYU 3 years ago, like we've heard so many horror stories about like, millionaire donors wanting to come in and build a new locker room or, do all these things for the program, and they're spending the money on band uniforms. Like this is the first time they've really let a booster come in and very publicly dictate terms for a head coaching hire. And that's not necessarily a sign of success, because like we see like Texas A&M has been doing that with their coaching hires for a long time. Like having boosters more publicly involved is not necessarily a good thing, but it's the first inkling of BYU is down to be a power, 4 athletic department, when previously it's like, yeah, we'll take your money, but we want to dictate where it goes. Now it's like, okay, we're okay to invest in one specific thing. So hopefully it's a tide that raises all boats, and Kevin Young is making over $4 million, and hopefully that trickles over to the, football program as well. And we start, paying our coaches more, funneling out more for NIL, all that stuff. But like, I don't know, the money seems to be there now, and BYU, I mean, it's always been there, but I think now I think BYU is more willing to spend it.
Yeah, I think it's perfect, the situation that we're watching right now with basketball, considering it's the experiment, I would imagine, is going to work well. You have a guy with NBA experience, bringing in more guys with NBA experience. You're bringing, as Joe mentioned, a guy who played his career under Rick Majerus at Utah, who's now coming to BYU and offering his experiences there. What I think is really positive with a lot of this is the basketball team in a way can act a little bit like an accelerated experiment. What happens when we put in all this money? Well, if BYU all of a sudden starts winning, then you start looking over at the football team, who, as Joe's mentioned, has already kind of started putting feelers out to be able to grow and play big boy ball, as it were. And it at least assures them that what they're doing is working. Now, football, I think, just naturally is going to take longer to turn around than basketball does, just given the nature of what the game of football entails versus the game of basketball. Like, you can only have 5 starters on the court at one time, and like 13 to 15 guys total in basketball. That's just a lot less guys to work with, a lot less like depth issues that you have to worry about. Whereas like football, you've got 22 like starters, offense, defense, you've got special teams, you've got a roster that I think during the season can dress like 75 or whatever. There's just a lot more moving pieces. There's a lot more coaches and positions in football that you have to replace over time, rather than bringing in Nick Young, who then brings in 3 dudes and all of a sudden you're set. And so I think basketball can act as a way, as kind of like a peek into the future for BYU football. But football is going to require more patience, because just of the nature that, football just means more people, and therefore it takes more time for it to change.
You mentioned Jay Hill. Like, obviously, I think that was a home run hire and great coach. But when you're talking about actual dollars that you're investing into the program, I think the rumor is that Jay Hill's making almost $1 million a year. Like, that was at least
I saw north of $1 million, but maybe I'm wrong.
Looking it up, so Jay Hill's salary at BYU, or Jay Hill contract, the Deseret News says he is expected to be paid close to $1 million. So that makes it sound like it's a little under $1 million. The median salary for a P5 defensive coordinator is $1.1 million. So if those numbers are to be believed, like, Jay Hill's making less than average what a P5 defensive coordinator makes. Now, obviously, for Jay Hill, like, that's a huge pay increase from what he was probably making at FCS school as their head coach, right? So for him, like, it's an increase. He's making more money. He's on a bigger stage. It's P4 football. Great. Like, BYU has a lot more money and resources than Weber State, obviously, where this is a whole other conversation. But even when it comes to the monetary investment that BYU football is making, like $30 million to Kevin Young, less than $1 million annually to Jay Hill. Jay Hill's not even reaching that average salary. Again, these are all just speculatory numbers because we only have what's available to us and the sources that we have available, because BYU doesn't disclose salaries as a private university. But like, I trust the Deseret News that, like, if they're putting out in their article that it's like almost $1 million, then it's probably almost $1 million. Meanwhile, Kevin Young's like top 15 highest paid basketball coach in the country, right? So I agree in the sense that, like, BYU, Jay Hill was a hire that BYU football doesn't normally make in the past. That shows improvement, but I still think there's a gap the size of the Grand Canyon right now, at least in the last year or two, as it regards to how far they're willing to go to invest in basketball versus football. And I just wonder if there's a genuine belief within the BYU athletic department, not to say like football school versus basketball school, but I wonder if the athletic department thinks BYU can be more competitive on a national scale in basketball, and it's easier to compete in the Big 12 and to win March Madness games than it would be for BYU football to compete in the Big 12 and go to the college football playoff.
Which on its face is an insane proposition. Like, the fact that anyone thinks BYU has the potential to be more successful in basketball, where BYU's, let's just say, institutional restrictions make it very, very hard to recruit top-end talent. And BYU doesn't really have a natural pipeline for talent in basketball.
We used to.
Yeah, I mean,
we used to when the fellows were playing in the church gyms.
I was going to say, when you have a church, when you have a gym in every single church in America, no one should be a better 3-point shooting team than BYU. But I digress. Yeah. Like, to me, if it were me, I would think that football would have a higher ceiling than basketball would in the Big 12, because one, basketball in the Big 12 is insane. Two, football has a much more natural recruiting base of more talented players than I think BYU's natural base for basketball would be. I think the difference is that, like, we have two very, very rich and very, very famous donors on the basketball side who are tired of watching BYU get bounced in the first round of the NCAA tournament. And really, that's all it takes. I say that like it's easy. It takes a couple of donors and boosters to just get really pissed off. Like, we saw Ryan Smith's tweet, which seemed to throw subtle shade at Mark Pope, inferring what a special place BYU is, and those who know. I don't know. I think the money is there for football, but sometimes I wonder if, like, it's a little too old. They try really hard not to be flashy on the football side, because I agree with you. I think, like, the excitement was, oh my gosh, BYU is willing to pay like middle of the Big 12 money. And that's a sign of investment.
We're almost paying T5 average money to a defensive coordinator. Gone are the days of $60,000 salaries.
And then now on the basketball side, we're like, psych, BYU's basketball coach is now the 15th highest paid head coach in the country. Like, that's where it's like, to your question of, like, is this just basketball or is it football? It's probably just too soon to tell. I hope it's a sign that the money's there and that BYU is now willing to use it. But I know the money is there in the collective. Like, I know that there's enough money to pay these guys. I think it's just a matter of, like, what does Kalani want for his football program? And I think he's been a little less vocal about that, besides just saying everyone gets a piece, which is great. But
yeah, and it might not even be like BYU athletics, right? Like, it could be twofold. One, just Kalani's not the rah, glitz and glam, let's pay people a bunch of money and let's do these crazy things. He's the anti Deion Sanders. It's reserved. Yeah. It's quiet. Yeah. Let's handle business. I only want guys who are at BYU because they want to be at BYU, not because of NIL or anything like that. Like where you're going to build great football players and great men. Like that's kind of Kalani Sitake's, love and learn.
There's prime time and then there's matinee over here.
Well said.
And then I think the second part of that, and you mentioned like all it takes is a donor, with deep pockets to get mad. I would push back on that a little bit. I think it takes a donor with the cachet that Ryan Smith has. And there's only one person like that in the state that I think could go to BYU and say, no, you are going to use my money for this. And I think that person is Ryan. And Ryan is a basketball guy. Like he's courtside at BYU basketball games. He obviously owns the Utah Jazz and now the NHL team. Like he's a basketball guy. I don't think he necessarily, like I'm sure he enjoys BYU football. I don't think he's going to go and give millions of dollars to BYU football in the same way that he does for basketball because he just likes basketball more. And I don't think there is a donor that is like that for BYU football. Like BYU football has a lot of donors, and I'm sure there's a lot of very wealthy people that give a lot of money to BYU football, but none of them have the persona of Ryan Smith. None of them are in the public eye like Ryan Smith, and quite frankly, probably none of them have as deep pockets as Ryan Smith. And so I think, like, I don't want it to be BYU Athletics that's making the decisions, right? That are saying, we'll go all out in basketball. That was just kind of a hypothesis that I had. Like, do they legitimately sit back and see runs by Loyola Chicago and see the stuff that Oakland was able to do in this tournament and see an 11 seed North Carolina State go to the Final Four and think it's a lot easier to do that than it would be to recruit and spend as much money to get BYU football to the point where they can compete against Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State, and Alabama? Because, like, that's not happening, right? Like, even Oregon, who has the most money and dumps more money into their football program than probably anyone out there, they still really can't compete at the same level as an Ohio State, a Michigan, or an Alabama on a consistent basis. So I do wonder if there's any part of the athletic department that just looks at that and says, if we're going to go all in on one of these sports, it might as well be basketball, because we've seen that teams can have Cinderella runs and it's more of a crapshoot when it comes to basketball, and we'll do that. And it probably takes less money too than to pour the money into BYU football to get them to a point where they're competing for national titles or playoff runs or whatever it is. So I don't know. Or is it simply just Ryan likes basketball and that's why it is what it is? It's probably that one, but who knows?
Yeah, I would say first, I think the simplest answer is it's just Ryan Smith is a big basketball guy. I think the second answer is, since Mark Pope left, there hasn't really been an opportunity for us to see what football is going to do about it. Because again, like Kalani's probably not going to get extended for $5 million right after going 5-7, right?
Yeah, but there were micro opportunities for BYU football, like quarterback, right? Like they had a terrible year this year. They fell apart. We'll get to we'll do a football thing at the end of the show and we'll talk about the quarterback room and, BYU football, because spring ball is wrapped and we don't know anything about it because BYU refuses to have a spring game. But that's kind of my point, right? Like BYU won't do a spring football game. They didn't bring in anybody great at quarterback this offseason, despite that being a clear need. They're hanging on to Aaron Roderick despite a back-to-back seasons of pretty mediocre offense, despite a lot of weapons that you had. Meanwhile, BYU basketball is hosting Midnight Madness, and they're getting amped, and they're going to NCAA tournaments, and they're spending $30 million on their head coach. BYU basketball is doing all the right things to get people invested and to get people excited and to put a good product on the field. I'm sure BYU football is practicing and preparing well, and there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, but it's I'm not seeing anything from them.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. the way this offseason in particular has been horrifically mismanaged from a PR perspective by BYU football because they try and be so secretive. Like we need to, I understand the reasons for not having a spring game. The field is getting redone. Maybe they didn't think the turf was safe enough, whatever the excuses are. BYU football has done absolutely nothing from what I can see to get fans excited for this upcoming season. They
aside from a fan fest in Dallas. Like,
yeah, they did it.
They went
did
and had blow up games and autographs in Dallas. And now
but it's like
kind of been it.
Again, I don't want this to turn like we have a lot of good basketball news, so I don't want to turn it into like a bash the football program. But like there is a very and this is like one of the reasons I love Mark Pope so much is he came in and immediately like he changed what BYU basketball, he changed the vision of what BYU basketball can look like from a recruiting perspective, from an energy perspective, from a marketing perspective, like all of those things. Mark Pope went out and changed the game. Like Mark Pope was out here bench pressing and putting out Twitter videos because of a stupid Twitter poll in 2020. He's hosting Midnight Madness and having students storm the court. He's he invited me on his freaking coach's show to hand him a pair of shoes because I was a fan that was stupid enough to think walking around the Marriott Center would make a difference. Like
Smart
that's enough. The kind of like that was the kind of stuff. It's gimmick guy, right? That was the kind of stuff that was an absolute masterclass from Mark Pope that I think has continued on. And that's the funny thing. Kevin Young isn't exactly like a massive personality, right? Like it's all the pomp and circumstance that it's. I don't know. Like, have you guys ever seen the Key and Peele anger translator video? That's Ryan Smith, but for BYU basketball. Like Kevin Young gets to be the nice, soothing, calm face of BYU basketball. Meanwhile, Ryan Smith is just like out here with money guns, making it rain behind him. Like the Hulu has live sports ads. Like that's the energy that BYU basketball has right now that football has just refused to do. And I think a lot of, and that's what BYU basketball was under Dave Rose, like very similar organizationally to football, which is very outdated. And I think right now, the way that the BYU football program is running things is just extremely outdated. Like we know we've seen from, the previous coaching staff with, Tuiaki and Ed Lamb, they put forth no effort in recruiting. On the offensive side of the ball, I'm not going to say they're putting forth no effort in recruiting, but the level of effort I believe is being put into the offensive side of the ball in recruiting is not lining up to what the defensive side of the ball is doing. And that to me is a sign that there is no clear expectation at the football program level of this is what BYU football should be. There's no vision of that. It's just like everyone puts in the same, like whatever amount of effort you guys feel like is enough, that's enough. You guys kind of like set your own assessment of yourselves, which is great when times are good, but it's clear that BYU basketball has modernized in a way that football hasn't. And I don't know if it's just a refusal to do it. Cause again, the money's there. Like there are donors willing and waiting. I know for a fact that, the Royal Blue Collective was willing and able to pay a quarterback whatever they wanted, but any quarterback that asked about NIL in the first 5 minutes was pretty much turned away. And that's the part that's frustrating is I think it's not an athletic department issue. It's not a money issue. It's not a donor issue. It's in some ways like it's a coaching issue. And if it works, it works. Like I love Kalani. I don't want him to go anywhere, but it seems clear that basketball has totally embraced the NIL era in a way that football hasn't.
And it's not even like an issue, right? Like it could potentially become an issue. I think if BYU has another terrible season football wise, it very well is probably firmly in the category of issue. But it's just it. And again, like I'm not trying to be negative. I think it's just an interesting juxtaposition of where BYU basketball is at and how they're branding themselves and what they're willing to do to get good players and to get good coaches and to get the fans excited as opposed to what BYU football is willing to do. And I do think it just comes down to like, well, who's running and, let's face it, funding the program and the show. It's Ryan and Danny running and funding BYU basketball, and Danny knows a thing or two about how to run a basketball team and how to put together, good coaching staffs and how to put together good rosters. I mean, the Boston Celtics are in an absolute tear, shredded the Miami Heat in round one, won every game except for the one game they lost by 30 points. And that team, minus a couple of pieces, was largely put together by Danny Ainge. And that, he didn't put together the coaching staff, but he's the one who brought in Brad Stevens from Butler, who is now putting together the coaching staff. Like, he built the Boston Celtics. Like 90% of the Boston Celtics was what Danny put together, and now they look like the favorites to win the NBA championship. Like, Danny Ainge knows how to get talented people into the building and to get the right people into the building and to build a program up. I think Ryan obviously knows what it takes to fund that sort of venture. I just think the football team, there's nothing and no one like that. That knows how to get the right people together and is willing to put the money in to get the right people there.
Counterpoint. It's time to bring Andy Reid home.
I mean, Andy Reid would be a great advisor, but again, he needs the money. Danny Ainge can sit there and say, get this Kevin Young guy. He's great. He's a phenomenal coach. And then let's go out and get Chris Burgess because he's a heck of a recruiter and is probably the best recruiter in the state of Utah. Let's put together this power staff with an assistant from Stanford and an NBA coach and all these things. That sounds really nice. And I think Andy could go in and say something like that to BYU football. But unless Ryan is signing the checks, we need a Ryan to sign those checks for BYU football in order for that to actually happen.
But that's where I don't think it's a money issue. I think the money is there. It's more of an eccentricity issue where there's no one who wants to be the public face of this. No one knows who runs the Royal Blue Collective. We know.
But the money is there. But to your point, is there a face there? Because again, going back to what I said earlier, Brian Santiago and Tom Homo are not telling Ryan Smith no. I think they can tell a football donor no. Whether it's Ken Garf or Mountain America, whatever entity is wanting to put money into BYU football, I don't think the athletic department has a problem telling them no. We'll use some of it for this, but we're also going to put some money here and we're going to fund this. And, women's volleyball needs new uniforms and the soccer team is really good. And we're going to take some of this money to fund their travel to the national championship tournament. And, that's all fine and dandy. The problem is that Ryan walks into the building and it's Ryan Smith and he's going to sit down and he's going to say, I'm going to give X amount of dollars and it's going to go to this. And they say, yes, sir. Right. I don't think there's anyone like that for football. They'll say, I'll give you X amount of dollars. And they'll say, okay, great. We'll use that for athletics as a whole.
Well, and I think that's where, again, if not every school, most schools only have one of those donors, right? If any. But I think
unless
that's
you're
where
Miami or Texas or.
For sure. But even Miami or Miami, for example, they had I can't remember what the one donor's name was. Who got everyone in trouble. But Houston has Tillman Fertitta. Most schools only have one, but to me, that's more of who is Utah's big time donor? They don't have one, but Kyle Whittingham is that
Ken Garf.
The
whole stadium renovation and they're the ones that gave the
I guess.
trucks. You have the Huntsmans and the Eccles.
Right, but Kyle Whittingham is the one who walks into that athletic department and says, hey, football needs this, football gets this.
Yeah. And they say, yes, sir. But Kalani's not going to do that.
And so that's the thing. I think that's kind of the issue we're running into here is our coach. And again, I hesitate to say this because I don't know anything. I don't know Kalani. This is all speculation based off of what they've allowed the fans to see. And I think that's part of the problem is we don't have, as fans, it's really hard to just and we're trying. It's really hard to just go gung-ho full support of something that you don't know how it works. You don't know the personalities.
Yeah.
And like, it's not like Kalani didn't used to be that guy. Like when Kalani first got hired, he was like jumping around in the student section for an NIT game. And that was like a weekly thing. Like, it's not like Kalani didn't used to be that guy. I don't know what happened, but it just kind of feels like it's almost like we've become complacent with BYU just looking like BYU. Like no energy, no enthusiasm. We don't have spring games. We just do things the BYU way. And that's how it's always been. And that's how it will always be. And we'll somehow still go 8-4.
We used to do spring games. They were awesome. Like as a kid, it was awesome to like meet John Beck and Michael. Like I have photos of me on the field with Michael Reed. Like they would do kids clinic on the field and then they do spring games and it was awesome. And I understand that there's no grass, but you did a spring game at Provo High like 3 years ago. You did the alumni game at Provo High. Like Max Hall tore his Achilles last year at the alumni game and you turned around and you said, throw him out on the field at Provo High again. Like if it wasn't good enough, if the field's not good enough for a spring game, like why is it good enough for your 45-year-old former quarterback coming with a torn
because
Achilles?
He's a
the
dog,
expendable
Hunter.
4.
He's a dog. That dude would have walked out there in a wheelchair. He would have walked there if it was just gravel.
See, and I think that's actually kind of the point, right? Is that why did they allow it? Well, because Max wasn't going to take no for an answer. I mean, that's just kind of who he is. But I mean, to kind of be the summation of everything that we've talked about, like I feel like with BYU, there's a whole lot of chickens and there's a whole lot of eggs, and no one knows where any of it started because, like, to Hunter's point, yeah, we don't have a big name, like big face donor for BYU, but at the same time, why would you donate? Why would you be the face of a spring gameless, like doing things at Provo High, frankly lying about injuries and and like how bad they are? Like why would you throw money at that?
To spite my Ute fan parents, Trevor.
I mean,
why did Ryan
throw money at that?
Why did Ryan throw money at a team that couldn't even win the West Coast Conference for basketball? Because he loves it. Like there's someone out there that loves BYU football. I just think there's no one like Ryan that can walk into the room with Tom and Chad Lewis and be like, no, we're doing this.
Well, okay. So step 2 in this chicken and egg problem is saying somebody does walk in to Brian Santiago and Tom Holmoe and goes, I have all this money and I want it to go to BYU football. And Tom goes, we would love that, but Kalani doesn't want it. He's talked about NIL all the time, how much he can't stand it. He sends QBs, very talented QBs, away the second they bring up NIL. Like, I don't want to be constantly butting heads with him. I'm his athletic director. I tell all of my coaches that I am here to lift them up and make their lives easier, and he doesn't want it. There are so many roadblocks along the way.
If a coach is saying, no, I don't want $10 million to get a good quarterback so that I can win more games and look better as a head coach, then I'm sorry, but we need a coach who will.
Well, again, I think we're getting a little off the rails.
I'm just saying it is this cycle of who's doing what.
I will say, based off of my discussions, I think there's way too much finger pointing between the athletic department and the football program. I think there's a lot of finger pointing from the coaching staff back to the athletic department saying we don't get the resources or what we need to really compete. And I think there's probably some people in the athletic department that also point the finger back at the football program and say, hey, you guys aren't doing enough from this, and this perspective. So it's just, I loved the Athletic article written about Mark Pope just before the NCAA tournament that, Mark Pope would have weekly meetings with one of the university presidents and they'd have this mantra that they would repeat of embrace the discomfort, embrace the awkwardness of BYU and what makes BYU unique, and try and live within that sphere and not point fingers, just acknowledge, hey, this is what it is. Like BYU is going to be in a weird place to try and build a successful sports program. And it just seems clear that the basketball team, and again, this was a Mark Pope thing, and it's continuing already under Kevin Young, is we don't care what the historical notions of BYU is. This is what it is now. Like Kevin Young is out there going out and recruiting potential top 5 lottery picks in the NBA draft next season because he just doesn't give a darn who comes to BYU historically. He's just going to go out and take it. Chris Burgess was a guy that we all thought would be an awesome head coach at BYU. And Kevin Young said, like, screw that. I'm bringing him over for a lateral move. Like it's just the big baller energy of, I don't care what the past has been. We're taking it. And it's clear that and this is what's crazy. There has been a seismic shift in the fan base over the last 6 months to now BYU all of a sudden is a basketball school. Like the BYU fan interest has completely moved away from football. When was the last time you saw like an extended Twitter thread or read an article about BYU football in 2024? I haven't, and it's one of I write about it. Like I'm literally one of the people who is in a position to write about BYU athletics, and I haven't written a single thing in 2024 about BYU football because there's nothing interesting to talk about, and that is so infuriating. But like we've moved on to, again, we've moved on to basketball because they are embracing. One, they're embracing what BYU is, but doing it in a way that is shedding the old norms of what BYU used to be. And I think that's what makes it so exciting is like, there's something new about this BYU basketball program that like, there's hope that we can compete when really history and demographics would indicate that BYU has no business having a competitive basketball program. And Ryan Smith and Kevin Young just said to hell with that.
Well, and like to your point, isn't that what BYU was supposed to be? Like, isn't that like the mission of what BYU was supposed to be like this entire time with athletics? Like, look, we're weird, we're different, we're competitive, and we're trying to get our message out there. Like BYU basketball, like not to get like too superlative or too crazy or whatever, but like BYU basketball is accomplishing exactly what I feel like in a way that what the church's vision was for BYU with its athletic program. We want to get out there. We want to put our name out there, be sitting at the table so that when people look over and go, hey, so what are you about? We're there. We're sitting there. We're talking about it. We're representing the church. We're representing Christ in a way. But the thing is unless you have a giant bag of money, you're not at the table. So BYU basketball is accomplishing the mission of the school, of the church, of everything that it's supposed to be representing. Whereas like the football team, like, dare I say, the candle is under the bushel at the moment. Like no one learns anything. There's no news. There's nothing to share. And like our talents are being buried. Okay. Like it's just like,
and that is our spiritual thought with Trevor.
We know what happens when we bury the talents, right? Like they go away. And so it's just like one of those things where it's like a switch, Joe, to your point, needs to be flipped. Because right now it's like we were supposed to be like the world is our campus, like the world is like whatever. We can't even have a spring game a block away from our campus anymore. Like the world, it's like the only part of campus that BYU football actually represents right now is right behind the student athlete building, and like that's it.
Hunter, I can't hear you.
Who's going to play quarterback?
I think you should turn your mic back off.
Like just when I think like it couldn't get more of a cluster, in that room, they turn around and they say, you know what? One Utah high school quarterback that we've gotten in the last like 3 years recruiting, he's gone. He's in the portal. The guy who you thought was like the future after Zach Wilson and Jaron Hall, gone. You said in the text, they pretty much like just admitted that they got their evaluation wrong coming out of high school, and they're now going with Hillstead instead of Ryder Burton. But it's just like, I don't know. I've said it a million times. The fact that BYU football was able to parlay the success of Jaron Hall and Zach Wilson, 2 straight NFL draft picks at quarterback, and then obviously Keaton just this last week got picked up by the Colts as an undrafted free agent. Like, you've now sent 3 quarterbacks to the NFL. 2 of them were draft picks. One of them was a second overall pick. And you don't really have anything to show for it. Like, Ryder was supposed to be what you had to show for it, and he's gone.
Yeah.
And now you have Cade Fennigan, Jake Retzloff, Gary Bohannon.
I'm going to be honest. My only hope at this point is that my expectations were through the floor when we heard reports that players were punching players in practice in BYU basketball. And they came out and finished in the top half of the Big 12. So if they can do it with a roster that essentially finished like 5th or 6th in the WCC, if they can have that kind of turnaround, then gosh darn it, I think Jake Retzloff can catch a snap.
So we need Jake Retzloff to start punching people in the face.
Someone punch someone.
And BYU football is back. Well, we've had fights the last few fall camps, right?
Yeah.
Although that didn't do us any good last year.
I mean, hey, the defense was greatly improved, and they were one of the reasons why the fight's breaking out.
I need Mo Bamba to just punch someone in the face.
Just Jack Retzloff into becoming the next Tom Brady.
Ignore the jersey.
The problem with the basketball one is the 2 dudes punching they didn't really contribute all that much.
Yeah,
they inspired everybody else. Everyone else is like, I don't want to do that. So
we need bench players to start punching. And then
Austin Riggs, this is your time.
Austin Riggs, isn't he the one at Rutgers now?
Yeah, I think so.
We don't even have Austin Riggs anymore. Now who's gonna punch?
So what are your? It's a long off season. I think we're gonna have a lot of time to talk about.
Now we enter. Now that our small talk to start the episode is over, let's dive into our 2 early predictions for BYU football in 2024.
I'm going to 2 early predictions of BYU basketball because I have no interest in doing a deep dive into the football program right this second.
Kingsley got drafted, though. That was cool.
That was cool.
Aiden's with the Browns. Eddie got an invite to the Broncos camp. Zach Wilson got traded. Like, it was, and again, not to keep going on this, this angle.
And we're back.
But like, the NFL draft was a week ago. We had a BYU player get picked in the 2nd round. We had multiple guys like sign undrafted free agent contracts. Max Tooley, he's in Houston, like with the Texans now. Like, and here we spent 55 minutes talking about how awesome of a job BYU basketball is doing. And like that, I think like that's kind of the point, right? Like, these awesome things happen for BYU football, at least for BYU alumni, and going, chasing their NFL dreams. And yet it's a basketball show now. Like, as BYU is now a basketball school, the Hype Train is now a basketball show. And I think that's just really
the bushel hunter.
It just shows where we're at with the 2 sports right now.
We need football to be a light on the hill, and they're not.
Someone asked a few weeks ago, like, what sport matters to you the most? And my honest answer was whichever one BYU is best at that time. Like, honestly,
mine's football. And it will always be football because even when BYU basketball is awesome and they're spending $30 million on a head coach and they're bringing in Chris Burgess as an assistant coach and they're signing 4-star guys and they're recruiting NBA lottery picks, I found a way to make it about football. And I think that is just like BYU, at least for now. Like we all sat here and we said, BYU basketball is doing awesome. Why can't BYU football do the same? And I think that like BYU football matters the most right now. And who knows, maybe it changes in a few years because the trajectory of BYU basketball is so great that how can you ignore that? And the trajectory for football is, shall I say, not as great. Like we spent it was BYU basketball is great. I wish BYU football could be great too. And then we're like, oh, what matters more? Like clearly it's football. And I want them to be good.
I want them to be good as well.
And if you don't think I'm going to sit here on this podcast come mid-August and say that BYU is going 14-0 national champs,
Dude,
you're kidding yourself. Because I'm going to have to dig deep. Let me tell you, these next 4 months are not going to be easy, but I will convince myself of it. There's no
McKay Hillstead might be the best third-string quarterback in the country. Like,
when we inevitably have to go to him by week 6, it's going to be electric.
The problem is Jake Retzlaff would also be the best QB3 in the country.
That's true. And Gary Bohannon was once the best QB2 in the country.
Gary
Bohannon, 4-star recruit out of high school. People forget that.
Yeah, I just think I'm with you, Hunter. Like, there's definitely, I love basketball. Like, basketball has always been like my jam. Football, obviously,
some say.
Here. But like going to football games, like sitting in LaVell Edwards Stadium, like that's always been like home for me. Like my family's been going for years. But basketball, as far as like sports go, has probably been one of my favorites to watch. But I just find myself as a fan. Like there are things that I want to get excited about. Like I want to see clips of good plays and better throws during spring camp and eventually fall camp and all these different things that like right now as a fan, like, yes, I want it to be about football, but my own school is making it so I can't be about football. That's what's so hard about it is it's like they're spurring me from like getting super hopeful.
I wish we could do an episode that was just like, hey, here's our takeaways from spring camp and the spring game, and here's how the players looked, and what did you see from Gary Bohannon in the spring game that you liked, and who are the winners and losers from that? But instead, it's just all speculation and guessing game, and
like
we're just having to, secondhand stories, and we obviously can talk to people who are in the know and do know what's going on, but even then it's like you're just hearing secondhand from people of, oh, this player did this guy looks good. Like it's not the same as being able to go sit in the LaVell Edwards Stadium and actually watch Jake Retzlaff throw passes 5 months after the season's over and be able to say, okay, yeah, I'm excited for football, or get any sort of read on the situation.
Yes.
Instead we're just left in the dark.
We were a scheduling conflict away from doing a essentially live show from the alumni game.
Yeah.
Like that's like
down
that's
bad.
Like that's what football, like that's what we want to do. Like we want to be at freaking Provo. I will go to what's a park down by the campus. Like
just
I don't care.
In
like
this field house.
I will pop open a freaking camper chair wherever you want us to go. I will hike the Y 50 times to watch BYU do something,
guys,
spring football wise, fall camp wise. I will, but
guys,
we're given nothing.
I would be honest. I would check into a hotel just to watch the pregame walkthrough in the ballroom. I really would.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
There is. I was kind of thinking about this. It's
so
like,
you do care about football more.
Oh, dude.
We got it. We
Trying,
got
man.
the straight
I'm-
answer from Trevor.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got
better
it.
at the
Hype
time.
Train podcast. I'm trying to talk about the hype things and the awesome things going on within BYU sports. But you're absolutely right. In a lot of ways, I would watch BYU just run skeleton drills for 45 minutes over probably about half of BYU's basketball.
If they were worried about injuries, I would have watched a flag football spring game. Like, I don't care.
A Madden tournament, like flip over the summer. Over the summer, I don't know.
I'll be
anything.
damned if I'm gonna watch a bunch of college kids play Madden. But like, just to see, guys run routes and Jake throw, and like, it doesn't even need to be full contact. Just put them out there and
film for us on BYU TV.
Put them out there in helmets and flags. I don't care. I just want some idea of what I can expect from this team in 2024. And unfortunately, we haven't really gotten that this year so far. And it kind of sucks. And that's why we sit here and we're like, this quarterback room is a mess. Like we don't have a good quarterback. And yet it's because they refuse to let us like get any glimpse at the quarterbacks. Like, put them out there. And Jake might even just like do a Zach Wilson pro day kind of thing where everything's scheduled and it's just Jake showing off. Like, I don't care. At least that's going to make me excited about the season. And I'm going to have some faith and I'm going to be like, okay, Retzloff is that guy. Retzloff's going to have a Zach Wilson, 2019, 2020 meteoric rise, or a John Beck 2004, 2005 meteoric rise. Like, I just want to be able to have something that I can point to and cling to for the next, 4 summer months that I can say, hey, BYU football is going to be awesome. Because remember that one throw that Jake made in the middle of April when everyone was wearing flags and they were out there at Provo High School and he
hit Keanu at tight end.
It was a walk awesome. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. I just want to see something. I just want some sort of visual that like BYU football is going to be all right, and we just haven't gotten that. And it kind of sucks. Meanwhile, BYU basketball is friggin' the talk of the town, dropping their big old money bags every which way, bringing in awesome guys, hiring coaches. It's awesome. BYU basketball is awesome, and I want that for BYU football. I guess is if I could sum up this podcast in one thing, it would be I've seen Ryan Smith, I've seen what you've done for other people, and I want that for BYU football.
I would also
roll credits, please.
Executive producer Dick Wolf, we're done.
Jerem Jordan, please just get a camera into the field house and show me some freaking clips. I don't care.
Strap a GoPro to my chest. I'll just like run across the field.
We need whoever that
Get
student
these legs
report.
stretched out one last time.
I know Joe's got to go. I just want to say, whoever the student reporter is at University of Oklahoma who was able to go across the street from the 5th floor of the dorm rooms and was able to film practice and see that Caleb Williams was getting starter reps in place of Spencer Rattler following the Texas game. I want him on the case in Provo at BYU because I need him to actually get me some info on what's going on with BYU football.
Me and Hunter are going to take up hang gliding or like parasailing. They can't get us up there. We'll just float across the field.
I believe that's Jackson Payne's music.
If there's a guy to do it, it's Jackson. We'll get him on and I'll send him a text and tell him I need the scoop. You might actually have to hike the Y, Trevor. You said you do it 50 times. Do it once and just get a telescope and point it directly down at the BYU practice fields. And on that note,
we'll take the camera. We'll take the camera from Baylor's arena. I would take that vision of
the Baylor basketball camera view.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, Knicks Sixers is a 1-point game with 35 seconds left.
Oh goodness.
I gotta go. I don't even care about these teams, but what a game.
Go Cougs.
Go Cougs. See you guys.